Hello, this is Mike Connolly, and I'm representing both the Portland Media Center and the Maine Irish Heritage Center with our program called the Heart of Maine. And today I'm very fortunate to have a longtime friend of mine from Munjoy Hill in Portland, now living down in New York, Sam Webb, the former chair of the Communist Party USA. And we're going to talk about a number of things today, about his life growing up in Portland, his family life, his education, and then how he became involved in the party, and some theological questions, if you might look at it that way, ideological, and finish off by talking about some of the people that you've probably met over the years.
Okay.
So Sam, you were born in Hollowell in 1945, and you went to Halldale High School. What are some of your earliest memories of growing up?
I guess Hollowell's a small town. At the time it was about 2,000 people, and I believe it's around 2,000 people now. Although it's different now than it was then. It was kind of on its last leg at that time. People have moved in, restaurants have opened up. So it's different today, but it was a very tight-knit community. I knew everybody in my neighborhood at the time, and at that time, in the post-war period, there were a lot of youngsters living in the neighborhood, kids my age. So it was very comfortable growing up there. We ran, went in and out of each other's houses, and we had a hill they closed off in the winters to sled on. Of course, we went too far from a big farm, and the owner of the farm used to let us play softball on one of the fields. Of course, you had to avoid certain things because cows were there.
Well, you learned to maneuver then.
Yeah, quickly. So it was it was a very tight-knit, comfortable town, good place to grow up in.
Sounds a little bit like my memories of Munjoy Hill, even though it's much more rural than Munjoy Hill would have been.
Yeah.
But again, the friendliness of the neighbors and knowing people.
Yeah.
That was very central.
Yeah.
What about your family? Were they religious at all, and what did you do on weekends?
Well, my mother was very religious. She's a devout Catholic, and myself and my two brothers grew up Catholics.
Your mother's maiden name, Sam?
Catherine Woodside.
Woodside, okay.
And we all grew up in this religious setting. Each of us were altar boys in the local church, just down the street. So it was, she was very, she died at a young age. Of course, that was sort of a wrenching blow for the whole family. I was only 9 at the time. So that was a difficult period for us.
Absolutely. I mean, you hear so many stories about people losing one or both of their parents at an early age.
Yeah.
I read somewhere where you were on a championship basketball team in the 8th grade. Was that the peak of your sports performance, Sam?
That was a highlight. It was all downhill after that. I played a lot of basketball after that in high school and college.
Now, you went to college at St. FX.
In Nova Scotia.
Yeah, and you played basketball there.
Played basketball there. Yeah.
Memories of that?
Oh, it's a wonderful experience playing. Of course, the team is very tight-knit, and I love the coach, Packy McFarland. Oh. Guess where he was from?
Yes,
Portland, Maine.
That's right.
Yeah, and so that was a great, I just enjoyed that 4 years there immensely. I'm still in touch with a lot of my classmates.
There were people from Portland and other parts of Maine up there at the time. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And some of your friends still in touch with?
Not here in Portland. They're actually up in mainly Canada. But Moose Connolly was from Portland. I think he grew up on the hill. He played tackle, Moose. And Red Sevigny went to a school in Biddeford. I think the Catholic high school there. St. Louis. He was an all-state quarterback. So there were a lot of students from Portland at that time, and from Maine, Massachusetts, too. Not so much now. But at that time, there were just scores of Americans there.
Kevin Kincannon, who we interviewed earlier, was one of those that went up there. Very proud of his connection to St. FX and others that you know.
Yeah.
Was it in those years, Sam, when you were coming back that you worked at the summer camp of the diocese?
High school I did, from 8th grade on. 8th grade until my first year of college. Every summer I worked at Camp Gregory in Gray, Maine. And I loved it there. I was a camper there for 2 years. Interestingly enough, best camp of my final year. A big surprise to everybody, especially my parents.
I understand that the director, Betty Van Wyck, once gave you some advice.
Yeah, she said, go to Arizona. I think she felt I wasn't quite worldly enough. I needed a little more experience.
When I first heard that, Sam, it reminded me of the advice that the high school principal at Portland High School gave to John Ford. He said, Portland's too small for you, go out west.
Yeah.
You know, and other people have gotten that same advice and done quite well. Well, beyond that, you went on to UConn. Was it the main campus in Storrs?
It was.
And you pursued a master's degree in economics.
Right, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that, and how did that change your political perspective, perhaps? Well,
at that time, actually the previous year, I was becoming radicalized. You know, the war was, this was 1968. And so, like, you know, young people at that time, we got kind of swept up in the anti-war movement. So at UConn, that continued. It was campus organizations and a lot of radical students. And I had more than one professor who was a Marxist. So that introduced me to Marxism. I hadn't had that much acquaintance with it before then. And so I started there. And then that kind of stimulated an interest, and I avidly pursued it after that.
So that was a turning point for you, but I think for a lot of people of your age and my age, the war in Vietnam was like a critical thing that helped us to form our political thinking.
Yeah, for me it was kind of like a political rupture from how I thought, what I did before the war, anti-war movement, and then after. It was like a rupture, and my views changed quite radically. Because I was, you know, just sort of a typical young man. I didn't have any ideas about changing the world. Had no ideas about ending the war. So it was new to me. But then getting swept up in the movement, the anti-war movement at the time, and encountering Marxism, I just had kind of a radical mental break from my past.
Did some of your friends in college or even high school have to go off to Vietnam?
Yeah, and I lost a couple over there. I had a friend, Dick Carter, who went to school with at St. FX. He was gung-ho. I remember before we were about to graduate, and he had already signed up for ROTC, the ROTC program, and he's anxious to go to Vietnam. No, I wasn't. I wasn't anti-war at that time, but I had no desire to go to Vietnam. But he did, and he got killed over there. And one other grade school friend of mine was killed in Vietnam.
Eventually, Sam, you had the good judgment to move down to Portland and Munjoy Hill, and you lived, unlike me, you lived on both sides of Munjoy Hill.
Exactly.
You were on the north side of Munjoy Hill when I think I first met you.
Yeah.
And then you moved over very close to where I live on the south side of the hill. Why did you choose Munjoy Hill, and what was that like?
Well, we started off in the West End. I came up here with seven or eight other people. And our idea to coming to Portland was to live communally, which we did. And the purpose was to raise enough money to buy land in Maine. The idea we were going to live subsistently on the land. We had read Scott Nearing and Helen Nearing. We were, you know, influenced by them. So we had this idea we're going to kind of mimic what they did. That was 1971 when I came here. And so the commune held together for a couple of years. we saved up enough money to buy nearly 100 acres up in West Peru, Maine. But when it came time to move there, I said, I guess not. I said, I can't make much of a revolution in West Peru, Maine. I'm going to stay here in Portland. So I did. And by that time, I joined the Young Workers' Liberation League.
Well, utopian communities have an interesting record, but they usually don't last all that long. There's usually ruptures and personality traits.
Yeah.
Did any of your friends actually move to West Peru?
Yeah, 2 couples did.
And did they stay long, or how did that work
They
out?
stayed a few years.
Yeah.
And it didn't work out over the longer run.
Yeah.
And they eventually moved back to the Midwest.
Around the same time, Sam, there were people from Maine that were trying to buy land up in Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
Especially in the Annapolis Valley.
Yeah.
And land was even cheaper up there.
Yeah.
Very productive.
Right.
And I don't know that any of them actually did it successfully, but that was... So eventually you moved from the West End to the East End.
Right.
And your experiences there on the East End?
Oh, I loved living on Munjoy Hill. Probably my favorite place that I've ever lived. It was just a great community. Of course, the prices were right too then.
Yes, they were.
3 of us shared an apartment, $100 a month, up on St. Lawrence Street. And I worked at B&M, which was just down the street. I was a pot walloper there, cleaning bean pots. So that was I lived there for about 5 years. That was a great experience. I look back at it very fondly.
I bet you do. And several years ago, I saw that house go on the market in an auction,
Yeah.
and it went for a ridiculously low price at the time. And I was always thinking of you, if you couldn't have just put together enough money to have that as your retirement home on Munjoy Hill.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah, was it to be? I remember we used to speak though of after the revolution that we would own Prout's Neck.
Yeah, yeah.
And that would be our place of residence. You mentioned a pot walloper. What was a pot walloper? And talk about your days at B&M.
Yeah, well, that was, we had this, in the Communist Party, we had the idea was to, our idea was the working class would be the leader of the socialist revolution. And so all of us got jobs in industry. We were going to kind of make our name there. So I ended up at B&M. Thankfully now, I loved it there, actually. But the idea was to build the movement, build the party, build the trade union movement. It was a unionized plant. So that was the idea behind it. And I was there for about 5 years. And it was great people there. And so it was still a fond experience of mine. Pot walloping is, they cook beans in this huge, round, steel, heavy pots. They dumped the beans out, then they came back to me. And I had this hose, high-pressure hose, hot water coming out of it. I swooped it around a couple of times and pushed it along.
You had your own little routine, I think, didn't you?
Yeah.
And you incorporated that into a dance move.
Exactly.
Called the Bean Pot Shuffle.
Yeah, yeah.
And you used to show it off in some of the local places, watering holes in Portland. While you were living on Munjoy Hill, at some point you decided to run for school committee.
Yeah.
And did you do other things along those same lines, or was that your one attempt at elected office in Portland?
No, I ran 2 or 3 times for school committee. Never got elected. I ran as a member of the Young Workers' Liberation League. So that didn't get me too many votes. But we covered the whole city with leaflets, and we went to all the candidates' nights, spoke about our approach to public education. Again, it was a good experience, although on election night, we never came out the winner, although we had great election night parties.
I think also that you did things called educationals. in which somebody would talk about a topic
Yeah.
at the time and invited people to come in. And
Right.
those were always a great deal of fun.
Yeah, yeah.
And they were educational too.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know where you could get that. I don't know if too many colleges were talking along those lines at the time, but
Yeah, probably next to none, actually.
next to none. When you left Portland, if I have it right, eventually you ended up as state Communist Party organizer for the state of Michigan,
Yeah,
and mostly in the suburbs of Detroit, or very close to the River Rouge plant, if I remember.
yeah. We lived in Detroit. Our office was in Detroit, and the bulk of the Communist Party membership lived in the Detroit area. You know, some people, what we used to call outstate, up further north, or up in Ann Arbor, for example. But that was the bulk of the membership, and I was out there 11 years, and it was a good, it was a good experience. I loved it out there. Still go back to visit.
Yeah, but because that was an industrial heartland at the time, and so the skills that you honed there would have been very different from what you did here in Maine, even though B&M was at a smaller scale, an industry.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy your time there? What was it educational for you?
Very much so. Yeah. I mean, Detroit is a special kind of city. It was one of the main centers of the working class. In the case of Detroit, black workers especially. Of course, it had a storied history along with Flint around the sit-down strikes, organization of the UAW, United Automobile Workers Union. And of course, in the struggle against racism, the city contributed greatly to that too. So it was a special place. People used to say it's Murder City. I never had a single problem out there in 11 years. And people, lose sight of the fact that it's one of the really great working class centers, center for fighting for working class, living standards, democracy, against racism.
There were communities that were ethnic enclaves, and certainly Eastern European, and I think also a large Arabic population, Palestinian, I think.
Yeah.
You probably experienced some of their customs and cuisine. Yeah. And that would have broadened your horizons as well, coming from Maine.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Great cuisine. Great cultures. Hamtramck was mainly Polish at the time. And the west side of Detroit and Dearborn they had large Middle Eastern communities up there, Palestinian, as you said. And they had their own left-wing political organizations in the Palestinian community and the Arab community generally.
I'd like to shift now to talk a little bit about your membership and your leadership in the Communist Party USA. And if you remember how you first introduced to this and what was the process that involved you first becoming a member, and what were the early years like for you?
Oh, well, I became a member here in Portland, and I met a group of communists, a small group. We were never big, but a small group of communists here in Portland. Mainly they came down from Orono at the University of Maine campus. They were radicals up there, then they moved here to Portland.
Some of them former SDS?
Yeah, SDS, yeah. All of them were, actually. So they moved to Portland. Orono was a small town, I guess. Portland was the hub. So I ran it. Actually, the first picket line I was on was in front of Porteous. And it was around the Great Boycott, I believe. And I met 2 or 3 communists.
Deirdre Godfrey was helping the Great Boycott at that time.
Yeah.
Working with Cesar Chavez.
Yeah.
And she came back to Maine.
Yeah.
And you met other people?
Yeah, we met 2 or 3 communists on that picket line. And so they introduced themselves and told me about meetings coming up, and eventually I went to one of the meetings. Yeah, we were quite active in the Great Boycott, actually, here in Portland.
I do remember that.
Yeah.
And the Catholic Church was very strongly supportive
Very much so.
of that as well.
Yeah, we had informational picket lines at the Shaw stores, and myself and another comrade, did informational picket line work at one of them. And we got in a little bit of trouble. They thought we were too little.
But that particular boycott was very popular and popularly supported.
Yeah.
Not just on the left, but
Yeah.
there was a strong sense of injustice being done to.
Yeah,
to
I mean, the
those
Catholic Church was a big component of that.
Right.
And it was a national movement.
Right. So now, Harry Warsaw is somebody that is associated with the party here in Maine and the history of the party. Tell us a little bit about your memories of him. He was what we call in Maine a character.
Yeah, he was a character.
Tell us a little bit about Harry. I know he ran for governor of Maine under the Communist Party ticket at one point.
Yeah, yeah. He was active in Boston initially, first of all. But during the McCarthy period, actually before that, he moved up to Maine. I think probably he's being harassed. And he ended up, working on the waterfront down here. And of course, Harry, as you say, Harry was a real character.
He was known as the Irish Jew on the waterfront because he was one of the few non-Irish workers there. And because of his religion and maybe because of his politics, he did run into a few problems. But he was more than able to take care of himself.
Yeah.
And physical fitness was very important to him.
Yeah, in fact, I remember Harry come to a meeting and would have picnics in the backyard or something like that. And Harry would come. And he liked to impress everybody with his physical prowess. So he'd get down and do push-ups, 10 or 15 push-ups.
I witnessed that.
And he was 75 at that time or something like that.
You knew one of his friends who lived out in Yarmouth, Larry Welch, who was also a friend of my father's. And I swear as soon as I opened the door and Larry was on the front porch, Harry was down on his grass doing several push-ups to impress Larry. So I remember that very, very, very fondly.
Yeah.
There was a fellow named Lou
Gordon.
Lou Gordon, and he was very active early on in the party up in Maine.
Yeah. By the way, Harry, he would come up to our apartment or whatever, and sometimes there'd be some young woman there. The first question was, he'd take me off to the side and say, "Is she class conscious?"
I suppose you never heard that at St. FX among your friends going on a date.
Yeah.
Take us through your evolution in the party up to, and also bring in your very close relationship with the party chair, Gus Hall.
Yeah. Well, I moved to New York City, where the national headquarters is, in 1988. And I went there to be part of what we called the Labor Commission and also the leadership bodies. So that was 1988. And I continued working out of that office until 2014 in different kind of capacities. But there I did a lot of traveling. In a sense, I didn't develop many New York City roots because I was traveling around the country doing party work, meeting with what we call clubs. It's like the basic unit of the party, meeting with public figures about this campaign or that campaign. So I was out of the office quite a bit, but I enjoyed that period of my life and was quite active.
And Gus Hall was the longtime chair of the party.
Yeah.
And so you were probably, he was a mentor to you then. And also I saw on audio, visual, the very moving memorial that you did at his funeral.
Yeah. I knew Gus very well, actually. And we collaborated a lot on a lot of different things. And of course, Gus came out of the great struggles of the 30s. So he and that whole generation was held in high regard. They did things that we didn't do. We could only hope we could do them. So we held them in high esteem. And that was true of Gus. And also, that whole generation, I think, they all had stories to tell.
Yes.
So I worked with Gus until 2013 or 14. Then he moved out of his position. It was time.
And how did it come about that you became his successor in around the year 2000?
Yeah.
And had you been building up relationships within the party at that point? How did they go about choosing the successor to Gus?
Well, I had relationships with party members, party leaders across the country, actually, because I did all this traveling. And I had a good relationship with Gus and also all the national leaders of that generation. And Gus was almost 90. He probably stayed on too long, actually.
There's a history of that in politics.
Yeah, especially in the Communist Party. Well, not just the Communist Party either. I know Senator Grassley from Iowa, I think, is in his 90s and he's still in the Senate, and there are others too. But he stayed on a little bit too long. I think we should have made this transition earlier. But we made the transition anyway. And actually, not too long after that, he died. But I just, I built up relationships. I had a wealth of experience, too, in different kind of settings. So they decided that I'd be the next chair of the party.
Did you think, because within 4 years of becoming the chair, you were actually doing something that I don't think too many communists had done before, and that was suggesting that the party or party members could work collaboratively with progressive Democrats.
Yeah.
And that didn't sit well with some members of the party. Where did that idea come from?
Actually, that idea came from, I got to attribute that to Gus. In 1980, Reagan was elected for the first time. And we had our national leadership body met shortly after that. And the main thrust of our political policy, from then on, was that the main problem in the country to social progress was the right wing in the Republican Party. And so the task was to build relationships and coalitions with a whole range of people of different political views in order to slow down and hopefully defeat this right-wing danger. Of course, Reagan was elected again in 1984. And frankly, that's a continuing problem, obviously, up until the present. You mentioned in one of your papers that there were two major events that caused you to rethink your positions, that being one of them. After 1980, the right-wing movement and the success, you have to say, of the right-wing movement politically in the country, even up to this day. And the second one was the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about that issue? Well, the Soviet Union was sort of the pivot of the world communist movement. All the communist parties, not just here, but around the world, looked to the Soviet Union as an example of developing socialism. And when it went belly up, I had to begin to rethink, my views toward the Soviet Union. Something was awry because I missed entirely. I mean, it was a surprise when the Soviet Union collapsed. It collapsed overnight, of course, as did the other socialist countries. So I had to begin to think, why did they dissolve so quickly? I mean, one would think after, well, the Soviet Union's case, 60 years, that wouldn't happen. And it was a complete surprise to all of us. So I had to rethink, a lot of different things about socialism, how it's organized, how it's structured, what its aims are, allies, the whole question of allies, working with people. So you had these two different processes going on. You had the rise of the right here and the collapse of the Soviet Union. So that forced me to take a fresh look at my views, which is always useful, I think.
One time you described it in a way that almost all sports fans could. If you're playing a basketball game and you get badly beaten, you want to change something before facing that team again.
Yeah, exactly.
Another time.
Otherwise, you just repeat that.
Repeating it. So you put these ideas into practice, and two things in particular, in 2005 and then again in 2011, well, you were writing actively at that time in the Daily Worker, in political affairs, in other places. But could you talk a little bit about reflections on socialism that you published in 2005?
Yeah.
Then I'll come to the other one.
Yeah. Well, that was very much shaped by what happened between 1989 and 1991. The collapse of the socialist world almost. I mean, there was China still, Vietnam still, but most of the socialist countries collapsed. So I had to kind of reflect on that. And I kind of took a critical look at my old views of socialism, especially its democratic character. We used to say the Soviet Union was democratic and people were participating actively in shaping their society. They were the makers of it. But that really wasn't the case. And I think a socialist society, if it's going to be viable, one of the underpinnings has to be an active citizenry. Workers have to have command in the production process at the workplace. And that's true in all the different institutions in a society, that the people who work there have to be the major components of it.
And you follow that thinking up a few years later in A Party of Socialism in the 21st Century in 2011.
Yeah.
And could you tell us a little bit about the reception to that? There were people in the party, both in this country and outside, that viewed it critically.
Yeah.
They called it revisionism. They called it social democracy. Some even went so far as to call it anti-communist.
Yeah.
Did you ever have any regrets about that, or what was your reaction to the critiques?
No regrets about it. I didn't agree with the critiques. Again, so much had happened to the socialist world. It just made sense to me that you have to take a fresh look at things.
Inertia is a very difficult thing to overcome.
Yeah. I mean, it is. People are dug in. They have a sort of stake in what they've done in the past, their views of the past. So that was something that I ran into. And not everybody, as you say, agreed with it, both here in the party and around the world. But I'm sure I've changed some things in what I wrote then, but by and large, I still would I adhere to that. 3
years after that, Sam, you stepped down as party chair.
Yeah.
Was that a difficult decision? You didn't run for re-election, as I understand it.
Right.
Was that a difficult decision for you at the time?
No, not at all. I'd seen what some of the problems were with Gus Hall. He was in that position until he was 90 years old. And when I was elected chair for the first time in 2000, I told myself, I didn't tell anybody else, but I told myself, there's got to be an end date. And in 2014, that seemed to be a good end date for me. And, there were, not everybody was on the same page at that time either. So I thought it was probably a good time for me to exit. And I think, in hindsight, I think that was the correct decision.
And you stayed in the party for another couple of years,
Yeah.
but then left the party.
Yeah.
What did you leaving the party connote? What did that mean?
Well, I didn't think the new leadership embraced what my views. I think what we'd been trying to do before I stepped down. I think they were going in a different direction, and I couldn't see myself being a part of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Still in all, it had represented a great portion of your life, and so you must have known that you were entering into a new phase.
Yeah,
after that,
for sure,
yeah.
for sure.
There's so many things we could talk about, because I think your position as the chair of the party is, I mean, very unique in the United States and in U.S. history. I'd like to talk to you about a few people that you must have met over this time. But the first thing I'd like to do is a little exercise. What would you say if you were in a school of, let's say, elementary or junior high school students, and the question came up, Sam, what does it mean to be a communist? How would you deal with that to a group of school children?
Oh, I think school children, I'd talk about the concept and practice of sharing. I think that's the best way I could kind of convey how I understand what communist means, sharing the wealth. Not a society of one person in competition with another person, but learning together, working together. I think that's what I try to convey.
Collective behavior as opposed to competitive behavior.
Right.
I understand that you were recently in Ireland. What was your experience like there?
Oh, I had a wonderful time there. My two daughters took me there, celebrating my 80th birthday. And we were there just a week, and we were in Dublin and Galway, and we kept quite busy. Every day we were up at an early hour, then out the door, and didn't get back until usually dinner time or after that. And it was a very thought-provoking trip. Of course, in Dublin, I went to the General Post Office, and they have a beautiful exhibit there of the 1916 revolution. And we also went to the prison, where some of them who ended up, including Connolly. And we had the best guide you could think of. He was so invested in what he was telling us. Well, that was very great experience. My daughter, she just loved it. So we went to Guinness, the Guinness factory, not a factory really, showcase.
Was that at your suggestion or theirs?
Well, theirs, actually.
Oh.
But I accommodated them. Yeah. And of course we went to a few pubs, heard some traditional Irish music, and the pubs were small. And often their whole families there. So we enjoyed that a great deal. Then in Galway, we went to the Aran Islands. That was quite an experience. Sometimes, in some ways, the bus trip out there was as good as anything. We had a driver who was just full of information. And then the boat ride out there was a little bit hair-raising. It was a rough day. Sea was rough.
They do have those in Ireland.
My daughter grabbed me like that.
Oh.
Yeah. So we just enjoyed the whole thing immensely.
Well, that was a very nice thing for your daughters to do. Tell us a little bit about Julia and Clara, and what are they doing now in life?
They're both in education. Julia's a principal of a grade school, K through 8, and Clara teaches history at a Boston high school. And so they're both happy with what they're doing. I know I'm happy with what they're doing. I think they're making a good contribution to society.
That's a great story in itself.
Yeah.
Staying on the Irish theme a little bit, The chair of the CP USA at one point was Elizabeth Gurley Flynn.
Yeah.
What did you hear about her, or what did you know about her when you studied?
Well, the main thing we knew about Elizabeth was rebel girl. You know, her being active in the strikes back in the late 20s, early 30s. And she was a leader. So that's, and then we knew, you know, Elizabeth liked to have fun. You know, we went, she lived at the Chelsea Hotel in New York on 23rd Street. It was kind of a bohemian kind of place, and Elizabeth was there. And she liked to invite people over, and they'd sing songs and, you know, drink a little pint of this, a pint of that. And she was beloved.
The Rebel Girl, of course, was written by Joe Hill.
Yeah, right.
And talking about the strikes in Lawrence and the Bread and Roses strike. And I also read that there was a monument put up in her honor in Concord, New Hampshire, but it was short-lived.
Yeah, I read that too.
Yeah, the Governor Sununu, I think, investigated how it came about, and it was gone within 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I wonder where the memento ever ended up.
I don't know. It tells you about the degree of anti-communism, especially among the right wing in this country. It's not pervasive necessarily, but the right wing, very anti-communist. So anything like that,
yes,
which was not a threat to anybody. You know, that little symbol they wanted to take down.
Absolutely. It must have frightened somebody. So you also mentioned somebody that was very important to me in my younger years, and that was Helen and Scott Nearing. Did you ever get a chance to meet them? Did you go up to Harborside at all?
Never went up to Harborside, but Helen and Scott came to Portland. We had them speak at least one May Day. They came down, Scott spoke, and he had this kind of he was a short guy, and but he had this kind of booming voice. That was typical of the old socialist speakers. They didn't have microphones. So they learned to speak in such a way that they could project the voice, you know, throughout a hall. And so when I was running for the Young Workers Liberation League for the school committee, Scott and Helen sent a contribution in, financial contribution.
I hope you didn't cash that. It'd be worth more as a memento.
I know. Trouble is we did.
I also read Living the Good Life. And it was very influential to me. I read about him leaving the party over an issue of censorship, because he had written a book called The Twilight of Empire, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Was that an issue in the party in those days and since about censorship?
Well, in those days, Scott had this different theory of imperialism. And because of that, he left the party. I mean, the party at that point, this was back in the early 30s, was in what I would call a sectarian phase. I mean, had he wrote this book 5 years later, probably nothing would have happened. But he left the party. I don't know if he's expelled or not, but he certainly asked to leave. And that was over differences about imperialism.
Yes. Another person who was either a party member or a fellow traveler, of course, and influential to me because of my connection to the longshoremen here, was Harry Bridges.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about Harry Bridges.
Yeah, I never met Harry, but you know, the older leaders in the party, you know, that I knew Harry. You know, when they went to the West Coast, they'd meet with Harry. Harry wasn't in the party as far as I know, but Harry was a left-winger, no question about that. And so they'd get together and chat, compare notes about Longshore, about the labor movement, about the West Coast, the Bay Area.
And he was a huge hero to those West Coast workers.
Oh, yeah.
And their working conditions, and I think their wages were superior to those on the East Coast.
Still is.
Still is today.
You know, today, interestingly, the West Coast longshore workers are still progressive left wing. The East Coast longshore workers, not so much.
Not so
In fact,
much.
their president supported Trump in this recent election. I think a good number of the longshoremen do too.
So there's a difference of 3,000 miles, and that means something, I suppose. Angela Davis, very active in the party, and I think for a certain period of time, and incredibly influential in the 60s in the African American movement and beyond. Did you have connections with her in some of those years?
Yeah, I knew Angela from meetings, and she'd come to Detroit now and then. And I knew when I was in New York too, she'd come by the office, sometimes speak. But she left in 1991. We had a major rupture in the party, split. And she was among those who left the party at the time. And a lot of it pivoted around this issue of democracy that we had talked about earlier.
Yes.
And of course, Angela continued to be active. She's very well admired, across the country and actually in many parts of the world too, still.
Speaking about around the world, you traveled as the chair of the Communist Party. Who were some of the leaders that you met in those travels?
Oh, well, in Moscow, I went to one of the Congress of the Soviet Communist Party. So I met a number of world leaders then, Fidel being one. I mean, just briefly. We didn't sit down and chat. Met the leader of Afghanistan at the time, Babarak Kemal. Met the leader of Hungary. So I met a lot of the different leaders, but it was only a brief meeting. I can't say we're close friends or anything like that, or collaborated or anything like that.
Did you ever travel to Cuba?
I did, yeah.
And what did you experience when you were there? Who did you go with, and what was your
experience? I went with two other members of the party leadership. This was about 2011 or something like that. And it was, of course, an eye-opening trip. Fidel at that time was getting on in years, so we didn't meet with him, but we met with other party leaders. And, they were in very difficult circumstances, and had been since the collapse of the Soviet Union, because that was their main economic ally.
In, I believe it was 1948, the Smith Act was enforced, and people such as Henry Winston and others were imprisoned, some for long periods of time. Did you ever meet Henry Winston? And did you meet some of those others that were involved in that?
I met most of them, actually. Had a very close relationship with some of them. Like George Myers, for example, was the head of the Labor Commission. He was imprisoned for about 5 or 6 years. Henry Winston I knew quite well. Of course, Gus spent time in prison too. Jim Jackson, outstanding African American leader. He knew him quite well.
The farm workers, you were active here. Did you ever go out to California? Did you ever have any contact with people out there, either Chavez or Dolores Huerta or other leaders?
I never did, but some of the comrades in Southern California did, especially to Dolores. I'm not so sure about Caesar.
Pete Seeger.
Yeah.
His music was so incredibly influential, and he was blacklisted for many years and not allowed to perform on the commercial television. I wonder, do you remember the night that he sang on the Smothers Brothers about the Big Muddy? the song about the soldier. It influenced me on the Vietnam question. very much.
Yeah.
I wonder, how about you?
I don't know if I caught that show, but I did. I got to know Pete a little bit. I mean, we weren't close friends at all, but on different occasions I would run into him. I remember one night he played down in Kennebunk Port. Were you there?
I was.
Yeah, and there must have been half dozen of us there to hear him. Then we talked a little bit afterwards with him.
And one of the youngsters that came down with us, do you remember?
Jumped in the car with him, went back to Boston.
He did.
Yeah.
Oh, the impetuousness of youth.
Yeah.
I was actually jealous of him.
Yeah.
After he did that. Who would have thought about it? Francis O'Brien, to stay on the Irish theme in Portland.
Yeah.
A true intellectual.
Yeah.
And a true lover of issues of justice, Irish freedom, things like that. Did you have any connection with Francis in the years that you were in Portland?
Only through Harry. Harry Warsaw took me to the bookstore. I don't know if he's running the bookstore now, but he had a loft of books, radical literature. So we sat down and chatted for a while. Yeah, he was had a kind of a legendary career.
He really was legendary. The house sold just a year or so ago, and I imagine all the books have found their way to one place or another, but he's very sorely missed by many people here in Portland.
Yeah, right.
Fortunately, we did a couple of interviews with him, so he still exists on that level. I want to get political again. On the question of Czechoslovakia. In 1968, there was something then called the Prague Spring.
Yeah.
And Alexander Dubček was involved in that. And then 21 years later or so, the Velvet Revolution in 1989. Do you remember what you were thinking about at the time? Because you were a representative of the Communist Party at that time. So what were your thoughts, either in 1968 or later in 19...
Well, in 68, I wasn't in the Communist Party yet. And I was just beginning to move in a radical direction. But I do remember my reaction to it. And I kind of agreed with John Kenneth Galbraith. He said, he compared the Soviet intervention in Czechoslovakia with the U.S. intervention in Vietnam. And to me, that made good sense. And again, you know, the issue at that time pivoted around the democracy. And the Soviet Union wouldn't tolerate, you know, the steps they were taking to democratize the country.
I remember you having quite an active debate with a member of the Democratic Socialist movement in Portland at that time. And I have to say that I agreed with you on several things, but on that one we were on opposite sides.
Yeah.
But I think eventually that, you know, Czechoslovakia did get its freedom eventually, and the entire Eastern Bloc dissolved. What were your thoughts when you were reading about that? As you said, it happened so quickly, almost overnight.
Well, surprise, first of all, because we thought, you know, the Soviet Union, those Eastern European countries was solidly socialist, but obviously they weren't. In fact, they had weak underpinnings. I mean, there were massive revolutions in those countries. Just people poured into the streets, you know, demanding to be heard, demanding more democracy. So, at that, I mean, that was in '89. You know, when the Czechoslovakia, the intervention there, in my early years in the party, I was of a different mind. You know, I sort of picked up how the party thought about it, embraced that. But in '89, I had a different reaction to the collapse of those countries.
How do you describe your politics today? And let me just tease that out a little bit. What are your thoughts on democratic socialism or liberal Democrats, progressive Democrats?
Yeah. Well, Progressive Democrat, I mean, it's interesting, there's quite a grouping now in the Congress. People often say the Democratic Party is controlled by corporations and all that, and corporations do have an influence there. But there's also a Democratic component to it, and to me, the Democratic Party's kind of leaning in a Democratic, liberal, progressive direction now. So I think that's a very important development.
And as you said, from 1980s onward, the rightward movement of the Republican Party was one of your major concerns.
Yeah.
How do you describe to somebody who doesn't know much about these issues the difference between a communist and a democratic socialist?
Well,
we're down to the last couple minutes now, Sam.
Yeah, I think we used to say this is back in the day, that communists believe it and the democratic socialists don't. They just espouse it. But I don't know. I think, what's happened over the past number of years, there's been a lot of rethinking taking place on both sides. And so, like the candidacy of Bernie Sanders, that's brought together big sections of the left, and I including the Communist Party. I'm not in the party now, but I know that, they look at it very favorably.
And I think that position was very strong here in Portland, because Bernie Sanders, the first time he ran, almost swept the city of Portland, and I think won the whole state of Maine, in fact. In the last minute and a half that we have, I'd just like to ask you the question, where do we go from here?
Well, the country has a big challenge in front of us. I mean, right now, the country, in my opinion, is moving in an authoritarian fascist direction. And that's going to hurt all of us. And the challenge, I think, is to build the broadest possible coalition to oppose it. And we've begun to see that, like the the No King's Day marches. And so we're beginning to see a movement, coalition develop to challenge, the direction that Trump and the MAGA movement have taken this country. And again, I think it's in a fascist direction. So this is entirely new, to this country.
And I think many people within the Democratic Party or on the left as a whole would agree with your assessment of the direction that the country's moving in.
Very much
Here
so.
in Portland, the No Kings March was massive down on Lincoln Park. So Sam, it's good to have you back in Portland. It's always good to see you back here. And thanks for sharing your time and your incredible experiences with us.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you.